Philosophical Lecture Shorts. Today we're going to do the second half of our mind-body problem videos. This time we're going to talk about physicalism, the other side. If you remember, in the last video we talked about well, a lot of different reasons why people would be a physicalist, but one of the things we kind of highlighted was the problem of interaction, of how does the mind interact with the brain. Well, one way to figure that out and to get rid of that problem is to say there is no mental processes, or the mental processes aren't needed to explain who we are, what's going on with us. And that's what it means to be a physicalist. Basically, the idea is that all mental processes can be completely understood through, or reducible or reduced to, physical processes. So basically that means even if you have mental processes, you don't need to understand what's going on up here. They're basically not needed. Or, as we'll see, something like eliminated materialist, or a physicalist may say something along the lines that there are no such thing as mental process and it's just an illusion. We'll talk about that in a second. And there's a lot of backing to support this idea, a lot of evidence. I mean, you can take that the brain is actually the mind instead of there being something separate. One thing is if you get a brain injury, something messes up with your mind. If you take drugs, which is messing with the chemistry in your brain, something happens to your mind. So there's good reasons to think that the mind maybe is just the brain. Okay? And so that's what physicalism, the main idea is. It's basically trying to get rid of any ideas of mental talk and just reduce it now to physical talk. Okay? And this is, like I'll say, it's very popular, as we'll see, with some the neuroscientists, cognitive science, science in general. Okay? But let's talk about a few of the different types. All right, the first one I want to highlight is eliminative materialism, and this is probably the most radical of any of the physicalists. And typically, these other physicalist things that we're going to talk about, they could be eliminative materialists too. So it's more of a general category. And basically, this is the idea that mental processes are an illusion. They do not exist. They've never existed and never will exist. And everything is just a physical process. Therefore, when someone says something about the mind, what they mean to say is the physical brain. Okay. Patricia and Paul Churchland are probably two of the leading eliminative materialists. They are extreme radical empiricists when it comes to this idea. They basically believe that any type of immaterial thing, whether it's mind, or soul, or anything like this, okay, or God, does not exist. To exist means to be physical for them, okay? If it is not physical, it does not exist. Now, I want to point out, and we'll talk about it at the end, now this is a claim that they cannot prove, okay? They claim they're just assuming. Now, of course, no one can ever see mental processes to prove the other side, but a lot of times I look at it as, do you want to accept mental processes or not? Basically, you can just choose, okay? I mean, whether they exist or whether they don't, there's never going to be evidence to show that there are no mental processes, but there probably will never be evidence to maybe show that there are mental processes separate from the physical world. So, Patricia and Paul Churchland take one side. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to take that side or they're going to have a great argument for it. If you, of course, talk to Patricia or Paul, they may say something different. But the basic idea is no mental processes. And what they think is basically the idea of the soul, which we had in ancient and medieval times, eventually becomes secularized into the mind. And basically all we're doing is when we talk about the mind, we're talking about something as ridiculous as the soul. Of course, Paul and Patricia don't believe in things like that. And so the mind is just a way secular people who aren't religious to keep some type of spiritual, mystical thing about us, when really it's something we should have gotten rid of back in medieval times when we started getting rid of the idea of the soul. So that's how they think about it, and it's just completely an illusion. They also use arguments for language. They think our language sometimes can make it sound like we have mental process, but it really isn't. But in the end, as long as you have the idea that eliminative materialist means there are no mental processes, only physical, then you got it. Okay? Now, another type of physicalism, which was really connected with the beginning of psychology, is behaviorism. Okay, we have Mr. Skinner, B.F. Skinner down there. If you've taken psychology before, you've probably heard about B.F. Skinner, especially, I mean, when you look at the main history of psychology is really in the 20th century. He basically spans that time period. What the idea of behaviorism is basically when psychology was first coming about, they had problems with subjectivity, okay? So, for example, let's say you show a picture to a group of people. One person says this picture disgusts them. Another one says this picture makes me feel bad. Another one says this picture disgusts me, on and on and on, okay? The problem with that is when one person's disgust and another person's bad, or both people's disgust, may be different levels. Like for me, I might find something that's really gruesome very disgusting, whereas someone may find it's not that gruesome, maybe someone picking their nose, they may say disgusting, okay? The problem is when we're both saying disgusting, how disgusted are we? They couldn't really find a way in which we could objectify this subjective thing, our mind, okay? So then the behaviors come along, and what the behavior says is, no. What processes are not reduced to what someone says or something like this, at least in that way. What mental processes are actually behavioral processes. So mental states are equal to behavioral states. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? Okay, mental states are equal behavioral states. Well, the basic idea is this, is that when someone, like this is exactly how B.F. Skinner would have put it, okay, when, let's say, John says he loves Stacy, okay, that's what he's going to say, and John says, I love Stacy. Well, according to the behaviors, that doesn't refer to some mental state in the mind, some state of consciousness, okay? As we'll see, behaviorism, at least B.F. Skinner's form, is a eliminated materialist. It doesn't believe there are such things as mental states. What B.F. Skinner and the rest of the behaviorists typically say is all mental states are nothing but behaviors. So when John says he loves Stacy, what that means is not he's having a consciousness of love for this woman, but he is actually performing behaviors that we generally take to be love behaviors. For example, he may kiss her, he may say, I love you, he may hold her hand, he may buy her roses, he may marry her. He does the behaviors that means that he's in love. And that's what it means to have the mental state of love. Or same thing with the mental state of depression or the mental state of happiness. If I'm depressed, what that really means is I have behaviors that show that I'm usually depressed, such as I say I want to kill myself, I say I'm depressed, I don't eat, I look mopey, okay? Same thing with happiness. This is how they deal with it. All mental states are not mental states. They are instead behaviors, okay? Now this is what was really popular about this is early on it allowed for basically general scientific theories about people, that this type of people, when they're doing this, means they're in love, or this type of thing like that. In general theories, it helped with. But as we'll see, eventually, behaviorism kind of becomes a debunked or a not as popular theory in psychology as we'll see, identity theorists or we'll talk about cognitive science becomes, okay? We'll talk about that in a second. But the main reason why it has its troubles is because of basically the lying scenario, okay? If you think about it, what happens if I went on a date? So let's say I went on a blind date with this woman, and with someone set me up, and I go, I meet her, we have a great time, I tell her jokes, she's laughing at it, she tells me I'm handsome, she touches my hand, she thanks me for dinner, we go home, she gives me a kiss, and even tells me that she'd like to see me again. So I am all intents and purposes of going, I think she likes me, okay? Now, I wait a day or two, I don't want to blow her up, but then I text her, and she doesn't respond, and then maybe I get another day, I just try calling, and then after that I'm like, no response. Well, later on I run into my friend who set me up, and he said that he talked to her. And come to see what happened is she said that she was disgusted by me and hated philosophy and hated my jokes and was really just irritated by me and hated the whole thing and just felt too bad to say anything and didn't want to make him uncomfortable, so she lied. Okay? Now, what happened was her behavior, what I saw, okay, was that she loved me. Or she not loved me, but liked me. She had these behaviors like this. But apparently she didn't feel that way. The problem is human beings can make whatever behavior they want mean anything, which points to maybe there's something more than just behavior back here. This is something Noam Chomsky really gets on the behaviors for, where he thinks everything is just behaviors and learned behavior. There's no place for new things to come out. So Noam Chomsky talks about behaviorism can't take what he calls novel behavior or novel language. We don't have time to get into that, but that's another kind of thing. It shows that there's something else going on in human beings more than just behavior, especially because we can take behavior to mean anything. I mean, if I want to, I can yell and scream at you. Could also mean that I like you. Think of it like a kid who's 5 years old in kindergarten and likes a girl. Okay? Usually he doesn't say he likes her, he hits her. All right? So the problem is, how do we the subjective problem comes back. How do we know which behaviors mean what? Because each human being can take them to mean something different. Now, B.F. Skinner has a great kind of counterexample to what I said. He says, well, what she showed was the behaviors of a liar. Which was true, but the problem is, how do we tell that? We can't, it doesn't completely, as we'll see, get rid of that subjective nature. There seems to be something else we want to get at, okay? So this ends up falling away to another theory of physicalism, which is the identity theory, okay? Identity theory is famous with neuroscience, cognitive science, okay? And basically what they're saying is that mental states are equal to brain states, okay? So we got a little room up here, put it mental states. Okay, we'll put mental equals brain states. All right? There you go. There. Mental states equals brain states. And now it's no longer behaviors, but what they're saying is my mental states correspond to a physical process in my brain, a chemical reaction, the firing of the synapse, something like this, okay? And as I said, you'll see why this is popular with neuroscience and cognitive science. And what proved this, though many philosophers and scientists thought it for a while was Phineas Gage in the 1840s, I believe, okay, was working out in California in the gold mine trying to get gold, got too close, okay, this guy got too close to an explosion that went off, and a rail spike went through his head, and he survived. But everyone said that what was funny about this was he was such a nice guy before the accident, and afterwards he was having mood swings, he was angry, starting fights, cursing the people, and no one liked him. What we discovered is this brain injury he had was changing his mental states, which therefore proves, okay, that your brain is where the mind is, at least. And for these identity theorists, who they don't have to be eliminated materialists, but they at least say this, that mental states are completely reducible or could be completely comprehended through brain states. Okay, and this is really makes sense for us, you know, therefore when I'm sad, it leads to maybe I'm having a lack of serotonin in my brain. Or when I'm happy, maybe I have an increase of it, feeling of euphoria, something like this. They can point, and they're really good. These neuroscientists and cognitive scientists are really good. We've even been able to map parts of the brain and show that this part means this, and this part means this. And we can even watch when people feel a certain way, this part will go off. And they've been able to show it. And so really, they've helped trying to find a physical way, objective way, to understand our minds, which is much better than something behaviorism did. And why many of us probably hear this and go, this sounds right, okay? Where would psychology or would this psychoanalysis be without something like this, which is definitely needed quite a bit. And also you think today, and you're feeling this way, you're feeling sad, oh, take this. Or you're feeling anxiety, take Xanax, something like that, right? We're very used to this idea, and it has shown that it's become very useful, maybe overused sometimes in the practical world, but very useful, and this is why it's so popular. Now, just to move on to functionalism here, because identity theory is not our main topic, even though it's a quite popular idea. Our main thing I want to talk about is functionalism, okay? And what functionalism is, this type of theory of physicalism, is basically trying to fix the problems they see in identity theory. One of the main problems that functionalists see in identity theory is they say identity theorists are biased towards brains. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean they're like a zombie who wants to eat brains, like in the original Night of the Living Dead or anything like that. What they mean is that identity theorists think that the only material which could the only material which a mind could come from or emerge from is a brain. Okay, brain. All right, this. What the functionalist says is that there may be other material in the world in which could produce, or which a brain or a mind could emerge. Okay. For example, we wouldn't say that let's say an alien, hypothetically, comes down to our Earth, becomes friends with us, he's talking to us, he has emotions, he says all these things, and he says, you know what? As a testament, when I die, I'll give my body up for you guys to research to learn about me. And then when he dies, we open him up and look in his brain, where his brain should be at least, and there's not brain matter. What we find there is twisted metals all around in this kind of electrical circuit that's been programmed in this biological body that he had. Now, would we say just because it's not made out of brain matter, all right, he didn't have a mind? It seemed he did everything else it did. This is exactly what the functional is saying. It's saying now, they, as we'll see, are not worried about aliens, but they are worried about maybe something like a machine or a computer. Could a computer have a mind? And so what they say is this. It's not mental states are equal to brain states or behavioral states. What it says is if it functions like a mind, then it has a mind. So mental states are equal to functional states, is what they're trying to say. You can add that up here. Mental states, okay, are equal to functional states. And what it means is, it kind of reminds me of that, if it quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, smells like a duck, then it's probably a duck. Well, if it quacks like a mind, speaks like a mind, reasons like a mind, does things like a mind will do, then it has a mind. That's the whole point. If it does everything we would expect a mind to do, then we must say the thing has a mind. And what they're trying to get the idea out here, is it possible, and functionalists do think it is, it might not be yet, but is it possible to create a machine or a computer that has artificial intelligence that has the same level of a human mind, therefore could learn, could feel, could speak, could reason, all these things? Is it possible? The functionalist thinks yes it is. Might not have achieved yet, but think it will be. And a famous example of this is by Alan Turing, the father of modern computer science, World War II hero, helped break the German code with his Turing machine. Okay, he discovered the algorithm which broke the German code that they were using. It helped us win the war. But he later started writing some philosophical stuff, and he developed this idea of the Turing test. And basically, it's a test for minds. How do we test if something has a mind? And this is one example of it. And basically, the idea is this: they put me in a room. Here I am in front of a computer screen. I said I can ask as many questions I want to the person, which is across this big wall here, sitting on a computer as well. Ask them as many as I want, and then once I'm sufficiently sure that I'm either talking to one, either a computer program, or two, another human being, once let's say I spend 10 hours in here and asking all these questions, if at the end I am convinced that who I'm talking to is the human being, and when they remove the wall I discovered I've been talking to a machine the whole time, if that's the case, if I am thoroughly convinced that machine had a human mind, then we must say the machine did have a mind. Okay? That is what it means to have a mind. If it does all the things a mind does, then it has a mind. Okay? Now, this is how functionalists look at it. As long as it acts like a mind, it is a mind. Now, there are some problems. Some of you may be thinking. And John Searle is a kind of a staunch critic of functionalism. And one of his famous arguments is the Chinese room argument. And he wants to show something that maybe some of you are kind of like, wait a minute, that doesn't mean it has a mind just because it convinces me. There must be something else in there that it's not doing, right? So Searle wants to point it out, and he creates the Chinese room argument. And the basic idea is imagine that John Searle goes to China, and he cannot speak Chinese. But he gets a part of this experiment in which the Chinese experimenters, who are behind this little window here, okay, and they sit him down in the room, and here he is on his table here, and they basically want to see if he knows Chinese. They're doing a little experiment. And so what they do is they hand in a piece of paper. And on this piece of paper, all he can really tell is it looks maybe like a story that's on it. And he's looking at it, but all he sees is in Chinese. So he sees squiggle, squiggle, squaggle, 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 squiggle, squiggly, squiggly, squig, squiggle, squaggle. Okay, that's what it looks like to him. Now, the next thing they do, they hand in this big book with stuff in it. And he opens it up, and he starts seeing that he sees this squiggle, squiggle. When you see this, it equals this squiggle, squiggle. And when this squiggle squiggles here with this squiggle, squiggle, and that squiggle, squiggle, then you put them together, and then he sees the code that you put this squiggle, squiggle. So basically, it's like a code book. Then they hand him another sheet. Okay? And on this, it looks like a set of questions that says here, and they give him a pen and say, obviously he gets the idea he must write it, but he has no idea what it says. He's looking at these squiggle squiggles, but he remembers, okay, there's this book over here. And he takes a book, and where he sees this squiggle squiggle, it matches up with the original paper of this squiggle squiggle, then he's supposed to write this squiggle squiggle. And when I see this question here, and I match it up with this in the book, and I see those squiggles squiggle, I realize this squiggle squiggle. And he goes and answers all the questions just writing his symbols out. Okay? He then hands it back, and the Chinese experimenters are surprised. They look at the questions, and they discover that he has answered every one completely correct, as if he understood it. Okay? So basically the paper he got originally about a story about a guy that goes to I think a restaurant and orders a cheeseburger and it's good. That's what they're asking about. But the question we want to know here is this. Does John Searle in this experiment understand Chinese? And of course most of us say no, he doesn't understand it. What he's actually doing is something like symbol manipulation. Okay? Manipulation. Alright? He doesn't truly understand what's happening. And this is what Searle wants to point out, is understanding is a huge part of what it means to have a mind. The mind can understand. It doesn't always, but to have a mind means you can understand what's going on. When I speak English, I'm not manipulating symbols according to Searle, but I'm actually understanding what I'm saying. And so that's what he's trying to bring here. Does the computer understand what's going on when it's being asked? And Searle says until the functionalist can prove that the mind, that these artificial minds can understand, we cannot say they've really passed the Turing test. We need a stricter test for this. He's not challenging the idea of functionalism, though he may want to, but what he's attacking is the idea of a Turing test. It's not a good test for minds. False positives could get through. A machine which passes all tests but doesn't understand would pass the test, but it doesn't really have a mind, right? That's what he's saying. A pretty good idea, okay? Or a pretty good counterexample. Now, many times there are a few other counterexamples to Searle. A functionalist could say this, well, maybe all we are really doing is complex symbol manipulation. And Searle's got kind of a, he thinks the human being's special and does these special things, and really no, we're just complex symbol manipulation at a very high level. And maybe there is no real understanding going on. That's something a functionalist could do. Though many of us might not agree with that because it does seem like we understand, but that's one move. My move I'd like to say against him is, you might be right, Searle, and say this. You are right, Searle, that you cannot prove understanding in a machine. But I'd also like to ask you, how do I prove understanding in you, a human being, Searle? Or you, guys that's watching this video right now. What do I do? Well, basically in my class, how do I know if you understand what I'm teaching in philosophy is? Well, I give a test. And I figure out that you've answered all the correct answers on it. Or when I ask questions, you seem to answer like you know what you're talking about. All I'm doing is looking at the outward kind of appearance of what you're saying. I can't get in your mind and see that you're understanding. What do I allow? Well, basically, I assume you have a mind because you do things that a mind normally would have. You function like a mind, and I say you have a mind. Why am I never have to prove, there's no way I could ever prove you have understanding. So for a human being, we can let it slide. As long as you look like you have a mind, it's okay. But a machine, we create this extra test to test understanding, or trying to, yet how could we ever test for that? How could you ever know something is understanding, whether it's a human or a machine? So I'm saying to Searle that what you're asking is maybe true, but it's something impossible to test for. A functionalist could never test for that. Just like I can't test if Searle has a mind or not. I just see him doing it. It's almost kind of like a robot racism, or a artificial intelligence racism. As weird as that sound is, just because you aren't born like a human or biological, you can't have a mind. Or where you're from, you can't have a mind. If there was a machine that looks just like me, who was born in a laboratory, can walk and talk and feel and cry and do all those things, we would really say it doesn't have a mind just because I was made in a laboratory, whereas you may have been born to a, born to a mother. And then also, if you think about what's really different than being programmed biologically or being programmed artificially. In some ways, it's still kind of a program, So there's a lot of ideas that, even though he may be right, I don't know necessarily if it's a great counterexample, because who could ever test for understanding? You never could. All right, so I'd like to hear what Searle would say about that, but we have to move on to kind of a finishing conclusion here, so the video is not too long. That's the idea, once again, about eliminative versus a subjective experience. And basically, what Patricia and Paul Churchland, if we end here, say, there is no such thing as subjective experience, or immaterial, or this kind of mind, all right? All there is the physical process, which may be the case, okay? But I want to point out that just because they make that claim, they can never prove it. They would have to actually show why there aren't any physical things. But the only way they could do that is accept, well, if it exists, it's physical, and therefore it's not. If it exists, it's physical. That claim cannot be proven with any evidence. It's just well, I hate, Patricia and Paul Churchland hate this, but I think they take it on faith. They truly believe in it. They have faith in this idea. Okay? But just in the same case, there are people out there who believe that maybe we have physical parts, but still an immaterial. Maybe the mind emerges from this physical process and creates something like a subjective experience. People who believe in something like this, that there's not only the physical, but a subjective thing that's really going on, a lived experience, is called qualia. Okay? They believe in something called qualia, which is basically the qualitative side of the mind. The chemicals in my brain may be going off for depression, but there's also this thing I experience that emerges from it. My experience of depression is not totally reducible to the idea that physically, the physical chemicals are going off. There's something more, and that's subjective experience. And for that, you could never necessarily prove it, other than you say, well, subjectively, I do feel like I'm going through that. I almost feel there's more evidence for this, but even I'll keep it the same, that whether you believe in this qualia or you believe you're eliminating materialist, either way, you aren't going to be able to prove it philosophically because of the subjective nature in the first place of it. And when someone like Patricia and Paul Churchland get on their kind of soapbox and claim that there's nothing more to it, you can accept that, but there's no way they're going to prove it to you. Okay? So it's up to you, which one would you rather have? I don't see this one, I think, is more fruitful, where we're looking at a more poetic, a more human type understanding. Of course, we may want to eliminate a human type understanding. Okay? Now, one other thing I want to put out here, other than this subjective experience, there's also an idea called phenomenology, which I can only mention for a second, that Edmund Husserl, Martin Heidegger really made famous, and especially Heidegger is one I'm real familiar with. I'm familiar with Husserl too. But the basic idea is they want a understanding of what lived experience is like, what the phenomena in themselves of my human lived experience. Now, yes, we can talk about the physical side or all these things, but those things, and maybe even subjective experience, understand in a very rational way, in a very philosophical way, these are all things, according to Husserl and Heidegger, that come later, things that we develop later. But our lived experience, before we say it's physical or subjective or material, whatever it is, there is a sense of the phenomena themselves, my lived experience of just how it is. And these are all things which are kind of rationalizations, later derivatives of a more original experience of this thing going on right now in being. And what phenomenology wants to get is to understand the phenomena in themselves before we categorize it as material or immaterial. They seem to be something else there. Those ideas come later. And they're trying to get back to a more original lived experience. And that seems to not only counteract with eliminating materialists, but also seems to kind of put some trouble on this thing, subjective experience of saying there's both physical and immaterial. For these guys, there's something before all of it. Before we can even begin saying that it's physical or immaterial, there must be something else there in our experience which we are encountering. Maybe something that's pre-theoretical or pre-ontological, as they may say. And that's what they want to get at, the phenomena themselves. And this is a question now when we get to hear of these things that were added to it. Maybe the physicalists and maybe the dualists who we taught earlier, maybe they're all wrong. Maybe there's something below all of it. Maybe those are constructions or structures which you're placing on this thing which we're in. And if you're interested in those type of ideas, check out phenomenology, the German phenomenologists, but also you can check out the French phenomenologists like Merleau-Ponty. Even Jean-Paul Sartre deals with a little bit of this. He's an existential phenomenologist. But anyway, for our discussion today, that ends it. And this ends our mind and body problem overview. If you have any questions, please email me. I'm always around. And if not, I will see you next time. Thank you.